Welcome back to a meeting of the Senate Committee on Government Operations for Thursday, February 13th. I will just remind folks again to please don't forget your sweetheart tomorrow, Valentine's Day. It's a neat day. I don't know if it's celebrated around the world or not, but it's celebrated in the USA.
So it's celebrated at my house tomorrow night.
Good. We are happy to welcome in our federal delegation representatives, two of whom I see on the screen already. I don't know, I guess, well, I'm going to guess that the senators take precedence, Ryan, but I'm certainly willing to go the other way if you so choose. Catherine Becker Van Haste is here representing the office of Bernie Sanders. I see also Ryan McLaren, the outreach representative for Senator Peter Welch, and David Scheer is on for the office of Congresswoman Becca Balint. So did you already flip a coin and figure out who's going first, or we're at your disposal for the next half hour, 40 minutes or so? Welcome.
It's good to see you all.
Hello. Usually we defer to our senior senator.
Okay.
We're just still barely getting used to that title, but we do our best. It's great to see you all. Sorry we can't be here in person, though I know you don't want my cold. So this is great that we can Zoom in. I think, I can say a couple of things. It's my understanding that sorry, for the record, Catherine Katie Van Haste, State Director for Senator Bernie Sanders. We want to answer your questions more so than give you a lecture. I know that my understanding is that you were looking for kind of an introduction to all of us and maybe hopefully get a sense from us to the best of our abilities to give you a sense of how some of what's going on in Washington may affect Vermont. We'll do our best, but really would kind of defer to your questions, to be quite honest, so that we're speaking to the things that you're thinking and worrying about. Just for a little bit of context, if it's helpful, I can just share a little bit about our office. So obviously, we have our Vermont office, which includes our outreach staff, our caseworkers who help individual Vermonters with issues with the federal government. We have a lot of those right now. If you are hearing from your constituents who are also our constituents who are having a discrete issue with the federal government, as opposed to, concerns, they're welcome to call us, of course, as well. But that if they are having specific problems with a benefit, we are happy to try to help. So please feel free to use our contact information. All three offices work together to make sure we're not duplicating efforts, and that allows us to help as many Vermonters as possible. And then out of our Vermont office as well, we take a ton of constituent phone calls and emails with their Vermonters' thoughts on the federal government, and send out our twice weekly Bernie Buzz that communicates to Vermonters about what's happening in Washington, but also we try to highlight great things that are happening in Vermont. We don't want to just talk about DC, but we really want to raise up good news stories about Vermont. So if you ever know of something, a constituent that's doing great work, someone that comes before the committee who's doing really amazing things, we'd love to hear about it and be able to feature it. So I just offer that as well. Our Vermont staff works super closely with our DC colleagues who primarily work on policy. The senator obviously was the chairman and is now the ranking member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which has jurisdiction of that whole list of agencies, and has obviously kept him quite busy and will for the foreseeable future. But it also means we have some of, to be honest, the most formidable experts on these issues working for Senator Sanders on his behalf and therefore on behalf of Vermonters. And we're basically one big seamless organization. So we're always happy to provide any assistance that we can, particularly on those issues. The senator also joined the Finance Committee this year, as did Senator Welch. And so we have two Vermonters on the Finance Committee, which is also great for Vermont. Among other things, the Finance Committee, sorry.
And surprising to have them both on.
It is. It's a rarity, but it's great. They might get into trouble, but they don't sit next to each other. So I think it's okay. And so that obviously, among many other things, does include Medicare and Medicaid, which was previously, that is outside of the Health Committee. So it's a nice addition of healthcare jurisdiction for Senator Sanders. And then he has remained on the Veterans Committee and the Environment and Public Works Committee and the Budget Committee. So keeping very busy. I can sort of stop there from an introductory standpoint, let Ryan and David jump in, and then maybe we just take your questions after that, but really defer to the committee members.
It's up to you, Katie. I'm fine doing it either way. Senator Clarkson does have a question.
So, as you know, we, in the past, and I think continuing, what would be really helpful from all three of you is the one person who's taking the lead on immigration issues, the one person taking the lead on tariff issues, the one person who's lead, So, and I know, having done some H-2B, some of the visa stuff with you, there is the first point. And so I think we'd appreciate the person you want us to be in touch with on specific issues, who's handling for all three of your offices. Because I know you combine efforts on this, because duplicating efforts is exhausting and not efficient.
Yes, absolutely. So I don't want to speak for my colleagues here, but I would say that from my perspective, you can always come to me. I have a very clear no wrong door policy in the Sanders office. And so you don't need to be worried about getting your question to the right person. Get it to me and I'll make sure it gets to them. And then you get the direct help from the super smart person, which might not be me, but I don't want you to have to worry about that. We can get you names, but just please, you can always just come to me.
Okay.
Great. I guess up next would be Ryan.
Hello, Ryan McLaren. I'm a senior advisor for Peter Welch here in Vermont. And I would just second what Katie said. First of all, like, I also recognizing I'm standing in for Rebecca, like Rebecca or myself, will always get you the right person, whether that's a caseworker or if it's an actual policy question, someone on our team in DC. And we are happy to help always. Katie covered the finance committee. Peter's also a member of the finance committee. We'll obviously talk about Medicare, Medicaid, the tax package that's going to come through, and all the reconciliation stuff will end up there at some point. Peter's also a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is the sort of like basket of the sort of bucket we do a lot of our democracy work, which might be relevant to you all, elections. Some of the sort of stuff Peter's been working on for a long time, like ending Citizens United and fixing our campaign finance system. He's working on ending partisan gerrymandering and requiring nonpartisan redistricting commissions across the country. We're also working on a bill to ban like deep fakes in election campaign communication.
We'll just finish testimony on that, Ryan.
Did you?
We're also working on a bill. Or there's
All right.
something like that.
Well, we can connect. That's our judiciary team.
Input.
Yep. And then we'll be working a ton on immigration in our judiciary committee and the other committee that Peter sits on. That's not finance, which is the ag committee. It's relevant in both spaces and something we expect to be talking a lot about over the next few years. Peter is also the ranking member on the Constitution Subcommittee in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So we theoretically, any constitutional amendment that comes up over the next few years will end up in that subcommittee. And Peter's Peter's been working on an amendment to the Constitution to require term limits for the Supreme Court. So by way of example, there will be many, many things I imagine that come through that committee or subcommittee. And then I touched on ag a little bit. Immigration will land there in our workload, but we also have punted at the end of last year, punted a full year our farm bill reauthorization or a new farm bill. And so that will consume a lot of our energy once we get through the nominations, I believe. And we have a lot of priorities there, which we talked to Senate Ag about last week. And he is also the subcommittee chairman on the Rural Development Subcommittee, which governs USDA rural development and farm credit. So there'll be some issues around farm credit that come up this year that are is separate from the Farm Bill reauthorization. And then we're always interested in finding ways to help our federal programs function better for rural communities and communities the scale of Vermont. That is true with USDA rural development. We've had wonderful, wonderful USDA RD staff in Vermont for a very long time that do a ton of hard work to deploy those resources in Vermont, but it is too hard. It is too hard to deploy the housing funding in a way that works in Vermont. It's too hard to deploy community facilities grants in a way that work for some of our small communities. And Peter's quite interested in finding ways to use that money efficiently and in ways that like work for rural communities the size and scale of Vermont. Because they don't have the technical capacity or really human capacity to do some of the red tape that's required for some of these programs. So we're trying to make it easier for folks. I will stop there. I think I've covered our litany of issues.
Senator Clarkson.
Ryan.
Yeah.
You, did housing and ag,
Yeah.
as you know, a big issue, and we had a group working on the ag sort of sub minimum wage, the ag farm worker pay this summer and fall. But we're also looking at migrant justice, as you know, is working on farm worker housing. Are you saying there's too much red tape for us to look at that at any federal money that may or may not continue to exist even for farm worker housing?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying specifically that USDA rural development has housing programs that go that are underutilized in Vermont because they don't really work well. And
Because they don't really what?
they don't work well for Vermont for a litany of reasons. And the people that have used them in Vermont have decided that it's not worth their time or energy to continue using them because they are so complicated and difficult. And I've heard from people who are building homes that would qualify for rural development housing programs that choose instead to go to HUD, which isn't, I don't think, known for its accessibility or ease of use.
Exactly.
Because the RD programs are so complicated and they have such a hard time interacting with that agency for a number of reasons. Staffing is a huge reason. Like we are trying to upstaff rural development across the country because they have been depleted to a point where they can't do their job effectively. But there are also just sort of like bureaucratic reasons that they don't quite work. And so his chairmanship is an opportunity to dive deeper in some of those and try and be like pragmatic about how to fix them in a way that works for everybody. But we are that is not specific at all to farm worker housing, and we are in a number of ways trying to do whatever we can to support that effort through the various groups here on the ground that are doing the actual work and funding streams.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yep.
David, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Senator. Good to be here. Sorry to not be able to be there in person. For the record, David Scher, the State Director for Congresswoman Becca Balint. The Congresswoman, this is entering her second term now, in the House. She sits currently on the House Judiciary Committee, which is really her main committee that she works on, and is also on the Budget Committee. On the House Judiciary Committee, she has two subcommittees. One is the subcommittee on the Constitution. So as Ryan was talking about, that will see some similar stuff to what the subcommittee that Senator Welch is on with respect to potential constitutional amendments, court reforms, things like that. And she's also on the lengthily named Subcommittee on Administrative State Regulatory Reform and Antitrust. But that committee is actually quite interesting, despite its long name. They're going to be engaging in some real serious looks at, or a very serious look at antitrust issues, which has been a subject of debate and engagement really on one of the rare things that has happened on both sides of the aisle, sometimes with differing motivations, but common interest there. So I think that committee will see a lot of activity. We expected to see a fair amount of activity in the next couple of years. She's also on the Budget Committee, as I mentioned. Despite the Budget Committee's name, the Budget Committee in the House doesn't control the federal budget. It is more of a policy committee that looks at some broad issues, but the House Ways and Means Committee does the revenue side of things, and the House Appropriations Committee does the appropriation side of things. So the House Budget Committee is more of a policy committee than it is an actual money committee. The Congresswoman has worked hard in the last couple of years on a couple of major issues, including housing and mental health. Her really big bill from the first term, which we'll be reintroducing again, was called the Community Housing Act. Realistically, in Congress, we're always just looking for, especially as a junior member of the minority party in the House, we are looking for opportunities to attach pieces of our bills to other bills and hoping that they'll move at some point. There has been bipartisan interest again in housing issues. We're going to have to wait and see how things unfold through the course of the term to see what opportunities there are, but that's certainly something we're really focused on and we're going to be working on. And I know, as I mentioned, the Congresswoman is, I skipped a subject. On the mental health side of things, we've done a number of different bills in the first term, which we'll also be reintroducing, and hoping to continue to shine a light on that, where I think there's a lot of understanding that that's a serious issue around the country and in Vermont. Final thing I'll just reiterate, I do think antitrust is going to be that this is the Congresswoman's first term on that subcommittee. We do think there's going to be a lot of activity and interest there. There's a lot of concern about the size of some of the major companies in the United States, some of their practices, a lot of concern about tech companies, the power that they wield, the challenges that there are around, sort of fairness and competition. So I think all of those things are going to be up for debate in the next couple of years, and the Congress will be working on it. But as both Ryan and Katie mentioned, we also do a lot of casework in Vermont. So all of our teams are here to help individual Vermonters and Vermont businesses and other Vermont entities, nonprofits and so forth, navigate federal services, federal agencies, trying to obtain federal benefits. Those are all things that our teams spend a lot of time working on as well, in addition to all the policy side. The other thing I would just say is, if you are wondering which of our teams is best to contact on any given issue, we just gave you a whole bunch of information. We all work together very closely. Our staffs have good relationships with each other. Ask whoever springs to mind first, and we will get you to the right team and the right people.
Thanks, David. Senator Clarkson.
So, you three wonderful people, I'm going to put this bee in your bonnet. We're going to know a lot more in 3 weeks. I think as we go to town meetings, because, sometimes Peter joins me in Windsor County at town meetings. Sometimes, I don't know how present you're going to be at town meetings, but I think it would be great if we held a town meeting with your legislature. If the three of them, or one speaking for all three of them, would, or any of you would actually update us for that moment on where we are with federal money and what we actually know, so we can take it forward to our town meetings with a bunch of terrified Vermonters. And I think it would be really helpful. We'll know a lot more in 3 weeks. Our first town meetings are Saturday, March 1st. It would be great maybe to consider after work, a 4:30 or 5 o'clock boot up with where you guys are, where we are at the moment.
So I can respond to that and say that that is something that we are working on actually pulling together for all of you, with all of you. Our challenge is getting our 3 schedules to align with your schedule, which is particularly challenging based on the lack of what we call state work period in the Senate this year. They're working 5-day weeks in DC, 5-day work weeks in DC with very little state work weeks. Usually they have Fridays reserved for the home state, and they ditched that this year. So it's a scheduling nightmare. We are looking at the potential to do something remotely.
Yeah, it could be remote. It doesn't need to be in person.
Yeah, so that's what we're hoping we can accomplish. And I think all 3 of us can take that.
I'm glad, Katie, that we're thinking, great minds are thinking alike. Because I just think we're gonna get a lot of national issues always sort of seem to take precedent over whatever we're trying to peddle in terms of what we're updating people with. So I think it'd be really helpful for us to be armed with sort of as much up-to-date stuff as we can have.
So for David's benefit, because I think both Katie and Ryan were in the Senate Ag Committee earlier.
Oh.
Well, I know they were.
You were there.
I was there too. And I'll just mention it for David's benefit and maybe tap both Ryan and Katie on the shoulder again. The federal milk marketing order at the moment has been changed so that the 4 classes of milk will determine, instead of the average of those prices individually, the higher of them to reflect what the price per hundredweight of the class 1 fluid milk is. And that has been greeted enthusiastically by every Vermont farmer I know. Because again, in order for a dairy farmer, especially to be profitable, the hundredweight milk price has to be somewhere north of $20 a hundredweight, probably more like 22, 23. I think in 25 or 22 rather, 2022, it was up to $25 and people were very happy and they were able to look after their workers and still do a profit. So we're hoping that, and I know the farm bill hasn't passed yet, but we're hoping that the federal milk marketing order will stay in place and not get monkeyed around again, so that farmers face a potential decline in the hundredweight price. So I'll just mention that again, David. I know you'll pass it on to Becca, and I appreciate that. Unless one of you wants to respond to that, and please, if you do, just let us know. The other thing that Ryan made a point of, and I think this committee is very interested. We have a Senate Bill number 23, which has to do with synthetic media and fining a person who deliberately and intentionally uses A1 in an election to negatively affect a candidate. And we're struggling with where we go with that in terms of possible exceptions for broadcasters, for instance, or social media platforms. So we haven't come to a decision. But Ryan, I'd be interested to know what Senator Welch is working on. You mentioned deep fakes. I mean, that's what we're talking about with synthetic media. Is there potentially a federal ban on them?
We're a long way from that. Senator.
Oh, well,
We've introduced a bill, which I'm happy
I was
to.
hoping to pass the football to you and you
Yeah,
can run down the line.
Exactly. For once, the feds would take the lead on this.
If only. But we have a bill we've written, and I'm happy to send that to you to
Sure.
so you can, depend on, you can review the scope of that and see where we're at. I think, in a lot of ways, elections administration is a state thing, so I wouldn't want it to it can inform your thinking and certainly shouldn't limit it. But I would imagine you all would be able to work faster than we will in terms of something becoming a law. So, but I'm happy to share where we are, and with that, I'm happy to offer like our Judiciary Committee team to discuss it with you about where they are, because they are actual lawyers and I'm not, and so they have some more.
Ask you just broadly, what does it propose to do?
Exactly that, just like institute a fine for the use of through the FEC through the use of deepfakes, artificial and voices, likenesses, etc. in election the political communication. So like the stuff you would have to report through the FEC anyways. It's similar, the AI space is new and different, and we're doing trying to do the same thing with like copyright protection around internet intellectual property for artists, voice actors, musicians, all that, to prevent the use of AI and this sort of technology from replicating their intellectual property. So it's in that same vein.
Senator Majewski.
So it is a ban, not a disclosure that the senator is putting forward on the, okay, great, thanks.
Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all of you coming in. I appreciate that. And we're all in the building at some point very recently. So thank you for being in person as well when you can. Since our chair brought up other committees and questions, you haven't had a chance to come to Senate Transportation. And I know what Senator Clarkson read my mind, but we are hearing in our committee, and obviously the Agency of Transportation Vermont has a great team with Costa Pappas and others who have been engaged in this conversation. But my understanding is all of our electric vehicle funding has been paused, if not never to be seen again. And that has obviously real world ramifications with contracts, but it also means that we as a state, if we want to continue to hit our goals that we have for electric vehicle adoption and infrastructure, we're going to need to fund that somehow. So it's either we don't do it because the federal money is gone, or we fund it as a state with state dollars, which are extremely difficult to come by. So I'm wondering if you could provide any thoughts on what we can expect with the NEVI money in particular, or if there is any glimmer of hope that will be coming back to us where we could restart those projects, or should we be actively thinking about what the state can fund?
Have it all been diverted to Tesla to hundreds of millions of dollars of Teslas being purchased for the Department of Defense.
Yeah. So. And any three of you could answer.
Nobody wants to.
We're all just jumping at the chance, right? I don't have a good answer, but I'll respond. How about that? And happy to have Ryan and David jump in, which is to say that.
Oh, yeah, you just paused. Just like the funding.
I think all three are frozen.
No, David's still there.
Oh, no, David's still there.
Oh,
I'm still here. I wonder if the power went out.
are they all in Vermont? Is that the issue? Did the power go out somewhere?
Huh.
I don't know. but
Steven,
Ryan
you're on
is
deck.
very frozen.
Well, I'll do the best I can. Oh, here's Ryan. Ryan,
Ryan's
you
back with
probably
me.
know more about this than I do if you want to.
I don't know about that, but it is.
Sorry, Ryan, did you hear Katie's response? Because she was frozen and we heard no answer.
No, I didn't hear what she was about to say, but there is really no good response, frankly, because everything is quite uncertain,
Okay.
and we don't know. Predicting anything is like a fool's errand at this point. We know it's been stopped. It is really hard to imagine. It's hard to know when and if it will turn back on. This is true for a lot of these things. Like, I heard from a legislator yesterday about from Bennington County about their bike path that's been
Yes.
the funding for that is stopped because it is like it's it mentioned reducing carbon emissions, and it's like a bike path in the local community. So everything, you know, if you do a control F search for things like carbon emissions or climate change, what we understand is it's all that's been stopped, and there's no rhyme or reason. You know, it's kind of random and hit or miss. But we've heard from what I can tell you is we've heard from VTrans, and we're on it and trying to help as best we can to get the money flowing again.
Okay. Senator Byowski.
Thank you. So I have two questions, and they're also probably going to be they may be some similar answers, but I'm sure you've also heard from the nonprofit community in Vermont about the chaos that is created. And I don't know if there's any way in on where some of that stands, or, you know, Vermont is in a particularly difficult space because of our per capita amount of nonprofits doing this work. So I'm just wondering if any of you have anything to say about that. And then I have another really hard question.
And Katie's back.
Yes, and Katie's back.
What was so bizarre about that was you guys lost me, but I could still see and hear you. And I thought I was talking, answering your question, and I wasn't. So it rebooted and now I'm back. But it sounds like Ryan answered what you needed from that. I probably will sound a lot like what Ryan said about your question, which is really to say that so there are a lot of pauses happening in a lot of programs for a lot of different reasons. And despite action taken by the courts, the pauses are still sporadically ongoing. So in some programs that are, you know, they have specific reasons why they're being looked at. So those are still on pause. But then there were also a whole host of just very straightforward programs that were appropriated by Congress under law that they had paused the funding for. And that includes a lot of funding for nonprofits. And, you know, what we understand about the way that these grants happen is that even when the nonprofit has, quote unquote, received the money, they still need to draw down that money with some frequency and regularity. And so it's not like they just get a nice check into their account and then they can spend it and send the receipts. They're drawing down with a regular basis. And that's, you know, nonprofits across the state. It includes our federally qualified health centers who are very reliant on federal funds to be able to do the work that they do. Obviously, there's a ton of nonprofits in Vermont that do international work, that work with refugees and asylees, and these are all folks who are impacted. So we don't have a lot of certainty. I can say that one thing we are doing is that we are making sure that these folks are communicating to the Vermont Attorney General as to what the impact is, because they are participating in the legal proceedings, which is really ultimately our best course of action. Those legal proceedings then need to be followed and upheld. And that's part of the uncharted territory we're in right now. But we're certainly tracking and very aware, but I will be perfectly honest with you in that we have also shared some caution with those entities about the certainty with which they can spend and draw down funds, because we don't have a lot of confidence right now that things are working business as usual. And so I understand when folks are saying, you know, if they have to outlay the money and then get reimbursed, that's a real risk right now. And it's terrible and they shouldn't be in this place, but that still is the reality that we are seeing across programs.
Okay. This was not my second question. This was a follow-up to this one. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just like by way of example, I had a conversation with a higher ed institution this morning that has like a large federal grant, NIST grant, sort of unrelated to anything. And they are, to highlight your point, they are in the middle of, they have $5 million left to spend. If they don't spend it in time, they might have to give back the other $5 million they got. But if they spend it now, it's on a reimbursement basis. Like, there's no guarantee that they get that money back when they decide to outlay $5 million to finish the construction of something on their campus. And that's just the like, we can't answer that question right now, and it's really, really hard. And to your point earlier, Senator Clarkson, I think hopefully we can in 3 weeks. Like, we know we have a better answer, but at some point, like, this is federal money. It's our problem. But like, it will become everyone's problem if they can't answer that question like sooner or later. And that's the really difficult part right now for us.
Well, and so that leads me to that, my same sort of two follow-up questions to that is, do we have a sense of the timeline for the legal action and answers? And should I be telling people who are reaching out to me to reach out to the Attorney General?
No and yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
I was really hoping
yeah.
our attorney amongst us was going to jump in
Right.
here.
Yeah.
To be clear, we all think this, well, Peter certainly thinks these actions are illegal, and that process is being litigated, but no and yes, as David said.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the legal actions are never, you can never know for sure how long things are going to take, and we don't in this in terms of what's happening now, there's just a lot of uncertainty about how some of these things will proceed. There was just a case where the judge issued a stay and then decided that there was no standing and the case went away. So like all these, there's a lot of uncertainty in cases. That being said, it certainly is possible that some things will get at least legally resolved and go up to the Supreme Court relatively quickly by the standards of federal cases, but that still isn't quick by any sort of normal standard. And then it remains to be seen what happens after that. And, I think one of the really sad things here that's a reality is that some entities won't make it, or at least significant amounts of jobs won't be able to survive, even if there's a favorable court ruling a year down the road. It might just be too late. And we're very aware of that. And it's one of the tragedies of what's happening right now.
So this was my actual second question. I'm hearing from, so it's no secret to any of you, I'm sure, that the state of education is a challenging landscape. And I'm hearing fear from school boards and teachers about the loss of Title I funds. Layoffs are actively being pursued because of this fear. Is that a fear that we should, yeah, I guess my question is your sort of view from like what you're seeing there, is that a fear that like should school districts be concerned about this? I know nobody said they were on the education committee, but I'm like actively have had 3 or 4 different conversations today where school districts are saying we have to lay people off because we're going to lose Title I money.
Well, they shouldn't lay people off until they know what they're going to lose.
So they have to notice it in their budgeting now. Like this fear and chaos is so widespread and so rampant.
Yeah, let me connect up with our education policy director on the help committee and see what insights she can share. I also am not up to speed, to be perfectly honest, as to what's included in the budget reconciliation bill regarding Title I. But I can ask. I mean, certainly the whole Department of Education has been deemed unnecessary by this administration. So, but that being said, federal funding for education, we know it's critical in every state in the country. Red, blue, doesn't matter. So let me try to get you some more information on that.
Thank you. I'd just like to be able to allay some of the fears that are driving these types of decisions right now, if possible.
Well, she's just been confirmed as new secretary. And if she gets rid of her department, she loses her secretaryship.
That is fair.
I mean, then she'll have nothing to be secretary of. So maybe she has some self-interest in maintaining the department.
I just worry about the chaos.
Oh, the chaos is so erosive and it's just so awful, the whole thing.
Does anyone else have questions for our delegation? Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing in DC, obviously. And I think to both Senator Pelkey and Senator Clarkson's point, I feel like we're at a different historical inflection point than I've at least experienced in my life. And especially the elders in my community seem to be referring to previous experiences they had in other countries, or experiences during like the Red Scare, which we had implications of here in Vermont when it comes to elected leaders, intellectuals, journalists being targeted, and basically being put on lists or being identified. And I'm just wondering if you or your offices had recommendations for state level elected officials and how you're thinking about that, because I've introduced legislation that looks at ICE and immigration, and there were memos that were put out by the White House that said they would be keeping track of folks who were doing things like that. And so I'm just wondering if you have thoughts or considerations or guidance that you, as folks in that position at the federal level, might have for folks at the state level. Or where you would tell me to go, because it feels very strange.
I think, just speaking broadly here, none of us can act as anybody's attorney, so I don't want anybody to take this to the bank or like, say like, oh, this is what the Congresswoman's state director is saying will happen for sure. But I do think it's important to remember that in this time of chaos and uncertainty and I think somewhat legitimate fear, we don't have reason to believe that the rights that we enjoy under the Constitution have disappeared. Those things are still there. Courts, and we're, testing the edges of executive power in the courts and things like that. And that's going to keep going. But in terms of individual rights, your freedom of speech and all of that sort of stuff, it's still there. And I think it's important that we behave as though it's still there. And that we don't sort of, do the bad people's work for them by having them, giving up on some of these things before we have reason to believe they're gone. So I think, we should behave as though all those rights and protections that are there, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and so forth, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, all that stuff is still there, and we should behave accordingly. And I think, there's going to be a lot of this sort of thing. We saw the FCC filing a complaint against a news outlet in California because they reported on ICE activities. I mean, that's really bad. And nothing more than that has happened, right? Like there's a lot of trying to bring some energy and fear and concern around this stuff. And, that outlet is still going. They're still doing their thing. They're gonna keep doing that thing. That they'll litigate that, and there's no reason to believe that courts and attorneys and those charged with enforcing the system are going to just not follow the law and the rights that we all have. So that's where I would go with that. Leave it open to Ryan and Katie to add more.
I mean, I just agree that there is an element of this that's trying to intimidate into compliance with something that is unconstitutional or illegal. And so, but I mean, I think we live in a time where the heat is turned up to 11, and there are legitimate and like real sort of the use of violence as a political tactic is, I think, increased quite a bit. A sort of, I'm not sure that's it. We saw it on January 6th. And so, that's real. And there are, I think it is one worth taking seriously. So like addressing it, we had like one of the bills I didn't mention was like a bill to protect election workers, like in the administration of their duty, like just the like nuts and bolts of like protecting people doing the thing that makes this system function is like an important and like relatively uncontroversial sort of stand to take. And then to just sort of keep moving forward with the sort of confidence that and vision that you all would work with anyways.
Katie?
I think the only thing that I would add to is just as many of our institutions are being tested, I think it is important that we still use the institutions that we do have and strengthen them and find ways to find allies. I'm sort of thinking about the National Council of State Legislators, right, where we can band together across party lines, across states. You know, so NCSL, I think even NGA is a place, not so much for you, but where the states are really going to receive the brunt of what's happening in Washington. And Washington can often have the ability to make grand gestures and statements, but it is the states who then bear those statements out in real life. And so where you can find allies and partners in unusual places, I think now is a good time for that work because it will, I think, make a difference. And ultimately, at least from what we have seen in the past, and I think we're seeing now, public opinion matters here, and good public opinion versus bad public opinion can change the way that folks in power respond.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, all three so thoughtful. So
Yeah.
Honestly, the kind of takes.
So we really appreciate your taking a large part of your afternoon to spend with us. And as they say, we'll be back in touch hopefully soon. And hopefully things will get to a little more predictable path. So
May I add one thing before we wrap here?
absolutely.
I don't
Sure.
want to, and thank you all for your very good questions. You didn't take it easy on us. The one thing I just want to highlight here is that we've spent a lot of our time, rightly so, I think, talking about executive actions and the courts. And I don't want to lose the fact that amongst that chaos, the House and Senate are engaging in a budget resolution and reconciliation process that will become law, and that will have the force of Congress and congressional law behind it. And there are some really awful things in there that are at very real risk of becoming law and signed by the president, and won't have some of the easier ways to fight. And so as you're thinking about where to put energy and focus, you know, I would say things like a 20% Medicaid cut would have an absolutely astronomical impact on Vermont's budget in a way that is difficult to see how our little state budget could recover from. So not to end as a downer here, but I don't want to lose the important fights that we need to have on budget reconciliation, which is the process that circumvents a 60 vote majority in the Senate and allows for a simple 50 to become law, to get lost in all the chaos here, because I do think the chaos is on purpose, and this work could fly under the radar if we're not careful.
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks again. And we will
Can I add one? Oh, sorry.
go ahead. Sue.
No, I had a question. Kitty, is there anything that we can do on the ground here to help you with that, given that that 20% cut would be catastrophic for Vermont, as there's so many of these because we're such a small state. Are there things we can do to help raise awareness? This is something I sometimes hear from constituents. They're like, what am I going to do? Call Bernie's office. He's obviously going to do the right thing. So like, if people are asking how they can help, what do I tell them?
Yeah, so I would say we have a Republican governor, we have a Republican lieutenant governor. Going to those associations, the Republican Governors Association and Lieutenant Governors Associations, being willing to stand up and say to Congress what the negative impact of these cuts on their states will be, I think is hugely important. State budgets have to balance in ways that the federal government does not. So state legislatures and governors talking about these real impacts is going to be incredibly important. I think that's a huge piece. I don't know that constituents can call, the governor's office as well. They're calling you, they're calling us. They can keep calling. It's fine. We welcome hearing from them. But I think also for all of you, getting hard data from the administration, the state administration on these impacts, I think will be incredibly important so that you know what these types of cuts will mean.
So just to tag on to that, Katie and Ryan and David, are you in close touch with our administration to share with them what you're hearing so that they can respond?
We are,
Yeah.
but I think you doing the same is not bad.
No, I agree. All of us asking for the same thing is helpful. I just assume you're communicating with them some of these huge challenges, so.
We are.
Katie, Ryan, David, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you soon.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
So committee, we're gonna go off in a second. I do have, draft copies of next week, because we do want to get this on the, agenda tomorrow. I think it's Friday, we gotta post it. So, Julian, I just want to thank you for, facilitating today. You really did a great job in, setting everybody up, and, I think you're one heck of a committee assistant.
Yes, to be able to do
Well,
it.
thank you. Megan helped. So
Oh, I'm sure she did, but, you still had your hand on the steering wheel, so we appreciate it.
Good work.
thank you.
Oh, happily you didn't have your hands on the steering wheel because that might have been treacherous.
Okay, we'll adjourn for the day.